The biting Wyoming wind howled a lonely song across the vast expanse of Thunder Creek Wildlife Sanctuary, a place where broken animals and shattered landscapes were given a second chance at peace. For 20 years, Eleanor Vance, a woman whose own spirit seemed as resilient and weathered as the ancient pines that dotted her land, had run this sanctuary as a final refuge for creatures that the world had deemed too wild, too dangerous, or too damaged to save. But of all the souls she had sheltered, none was as magnificent or as unapproachable as Kodiak. He was a creature of legend, a 2,000-pound American bison who was the last survivor of a herd struck down by a brutal, fast-moving illness years ago. Rescued as a young, traumatized bull, Kodiak had grown into a formidable giant, his massive head crowned with a shaggy mane of dark fur and horns that curved like twin scythes against the sky. His eyes, rarely seen beneath the heavy curtain of his hair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Held a deep, primal sorrow and a fierce, untamable fire. No one at the sanctuary dared to approach Kodiak. His enclosure, a sprawling 50-acre expanse of natural grassland and rolling hills, was bordered by reinforced steel fencing that he had tested many times in fits of explosive rage. He tolerated the presence of humans only as distant figures who brought him food and water, but any attempt to get closer was met with a ground-shaking snort, a pawing of the earth, and the terrifying promise of a charge that no fence could ever truly guarantee to hold. The staff, a collection of experienced animal handlers and veterinarians, had learned to respect his boundaries with a mixture of awe and fear. They spoke of him in hushed tones, referring to him not just as an animal, but as a force of nature, a living monument to wildness and grief. He was the sanctuary's greatest triumph and its most heartbreaking mystery, a king ruling a lonely kingdom of one. It was into this world of quiet healing and respected boundaries that Leo arrived. He was a whisper of a young man, barely 20 years old, confined to a wheelchair that seemed to be an extension of the profound stillness that had enveloped him. 6 months prior, a head-on collision on a rain-slicked highway had stolen his ability to walk and, far more devastatingly, had taken the life of his older brother, who had been driving. The accident had left Leo adrift in a silent sea of grief and guilt, his once bright future now a landscape as barren and intimidating as the steepest Wyoming mountains. His parents, desperate to find anything that might pierce the veil of his depression, had brought him to Thunder Creek, hoping that the quiet majesty of the animals and the vastness of the open space might offer a sliver of solace that doctors and therapists had failed to provide. Leo felt nothing but a hollow echo of his own emptiness as his father pushed his wheelchair along the sanctuary's gravel paths. He saw the rescued wolves, the rehabilitated eagles, the herds of deer, but their stories of survival felt like a reproach to his own state of paralysis. Then he saw Kodiak. The great bison was standing on a distant ridge, a solitary silhouette against the vast, unforgiving sky. Something about the animal's profound isolation resonated with a painful frequency deep within Leo's own shattered soul. Here was another creature defined by loss, another being who stood alone against the world. Eleanor Vance, seeing the direction of the young man's gaze, approached them cautiously. Her face, etched with the lines of a life spent outdoors, was softened by a deep, compassionate wisdom. "That's Kodiak," she said, her voice a low, respectful murmur. "He's our oldest resident. A magnificent spirit, but he carries a heavy burden. We keep our distance. He's been through more than any creature should have to endure." Leo's father nodded, beginning to wheel his son away, but Leo lifted a weak hand, signaling him to stop. He couldn't take his eyes off the bison. For the first time since the accident, he felt a flicker of something other than numbness. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a deep, magnetic curiosity. He wanted to get closer, not out of a tourist's desire to see a wild animal, but out of a desperate need to be near something that seemed to understand the language of his own silence. "Just for a minute," Leo whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. Against her better judgment, Eleanor agreed, watching with a practiced eye as Leo's father pushed the wheelchair to the designated viewing area, a reinforced platform a safe 50 yards from Kodiak's fence line. The other visitors kept a respectful distance, aware of the bull's volatile reputation. But as Leo sat there, his frail body a stark contrast to the bison's immense power, something unprecedented happened. Kodiak, who usually ignored human observers or treated them with aggressive disdain, turned his massive head and looked directly at Leo. Their gazes met across the expanse of frost-tinged grass. In the bison's dark eyes, Leo didn't see the rage or madness that the staff had described. He saw a reflection of his own profound loneliness, a sorrow so deep it felt ancient. The world seemed to fall away, the wind died down, and for a long breathless moment, there was only the silent communication between two broken souls, each recognizing the geography of the other's pain. This was the beginning of a story that no one could have predicted, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound healing doesn't come from words or medicine, but from the simple, silent understanding that you are not alone in your darkness. The daily visits became Leo's entire reason for waking. Each morning, against the well-meaning protests of his parents and the cautious advice of Eleanor, his father would push his wheelchair to the viewing platform overlooking Kodiak's vast enclosure. And each morning, the great bison would be there waiting. At first, he would remain on his distant ridge, a solitary monarch observing his domain. But as the days turned into a week, Kodiak began to change his routine. He started grazing closer to the fence line, always keeping the wheelchair in his peripheral vision. He never made direct eye contact for long, as if respecting that a sustained gaze could be seen as a threat, but his awareness of Leo was constant and palpable. Leo, for his part, found a strange comfort in their silent ritual. He didn't try to speak or make gestures. He simply sat, his hands resting limply in his lap, and shared his silence with the bison. He found that in Kodiak's immense, self-contained presence, his own grief felt less like a crushing weight and more like a shared landscape. The endless loop of the accident, the screech of tires, the shattering glass, the finality of his brother's absence, it all seemed to quiet down in the presence of the bull. The bison's sorrow was older, vaster, and in its shadow, Leo's own pain felt less monstrous. Eleanor and her staff watched these daily vigils with a mixture of apprehension and wonder. "I've worked with Kodiak for 10 years, said Marcus, the head animal handler, a man whose arms were a roadmap of scars from less predictable animals. He's never shown this level of sustained, non-aggressive interest in any person. It's like he knows that boy is different." The turning point came on a bitterly cold afternoon 2 weeks into Leo's stay. A sudden squall blew in from the mountains, bringing with it a driving, icy rain. Leo's father rushed to get him back to the lodge, but the gravel path had turned to thick, clinging mud. The wheelchair's wheels became hopelessly mired, sinking deep into the cold earth, just 30 yards from Kodiak's fence. As his father struggled to free the chair, his efforts only digging them deeper, Leo felt a familiar wave of helplessness wash over him. He was trapped, cold, and utterly dependent, a feeling that had become the defining feature of his existence. It was then that Kodiak began to move. With a deliberation that stunned the 2 sanctuary workers who were rushing to help, the bison walked directly to the fence line opposite where Leo was stranded. He didn't snort or paw the ground. He simply stood there, his massive body acting as a natural windbreak against the punishing gale. He lowered his great head and let out a low, rumbling sound, a vocalization so deep and resonant it seemed to vibrate in Leo's very bones. It wasn't a sound of aggression. It was a sound of concern, of communication. Leo looked up, the icy rain plastering his hair to his forehead, and met the bison's gaze. For the first time, he spoke directly to the animal, his words carried away by the wind. "It's okay," he said, not even realizing he was speaking. "I'm just stuck." As if he understood, Kodiak took a step closer to the fence, his warm breath creating clouds of steam in the frigid air. He remained in that protective stance, a steadfast shield against the storm, until Marcus and another handler finally managed to heave the wheelchair from the mud and get Leo to safety. Back in the warmth of the sanctuary lodge, wrapped in blankets and sipping hot tea, Leo couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The bison hadn't just been present. He had been protective. He had offered comfort in the only way he could. That night, Leo had his first dream that wasn't a nightmare. He dreamt he was standing on his own 2 feet in a vast, open field, the warm sun on his face, and beside him stood Kodiak, his presence not threatening, but profoundly reassuring. The next morning, when Leo's father came to his room, he found his son already awake and dressed, a determined look on his face that had been absent for 6 long months. "I want to go see him," Leo said, his voice stronger than it had been since the accident. This time, when they reached the viewing platform, Leo had a new sense of purpose. He knew, with an unshakable certainty, that his connection with this animal was not a one-sided projection of his own grief. It was real. It was a lifeline. He began to talk to Kodiak, his voice soft at first, but growing steadier with each passing day. He told the bison about his brother, about their shared love for hiking and terrible jokes. He spoke of his guilt, his anger, his fear that he would never feel whole again. Kodiak would listen, his massive form a study in stillness, his occasional low rumbles sounding like responses in a language only Leo could understand. The bison, in turn, began to reveal a new side of himself. The explosive fits of rage that had once sent staff running for cover became less frequent, replaced by a quiet, watchful calm. He started to allow Eleanor's truck to come closer during feeding times, his suspicions slowly being replaced by a tentative tolerance. The sanctuary staff began to refer to Leo as the Bison Whisperer, a joke that held a deep undercurrent of truth. They didn't understand how or why it was happening, but it was clear that the needy young man and the untouchable bison were healing each other in ways that defied all logic and professional experience. If this incredible story of 2 broken souls finding a path to healing in each other's silent company is resonating with you, we would be so grateful if you could take a moment to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us share more amazing stories like this one, tales that prove that the deepest connections are often found where we least expect them, transcending the barriers of species, grief, and our own perceived limitations. Every subscription and like helps these powerful narratives of hope reach those who need to see them most. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in the transformative power of empathy. As autumn bled into the harsh Wyoming winter, the bond between Leo and Kodiak deepened into a routine that became the new heartbeat of the sanctuary. The daily visits were no longer just about observation. They were about shared existence. Leo's parents, seeing the profound change in their son, had arranged to rent a small cabin on the edge of the sanctuary property, allowing the daily communion to continue uninterrupted. Leo's physical therapists were astonished by his progress. The listless young man who had once refused to engage in his exercises now attacked them with a quiet determination, his motivation clear. "I need to get stronger," he told his therapist, "for him." He had started to believe for the first time that walking again might be a possibility, not just for himself, but so that he could one day meet the bison on his own terms, not as a helpless figure in a chair, but as an equal. Kodiak's transformation was just as remarkable. The 50-acre enclosure that had once been his prison had now become a shared space. He would often trail Leo's wheelchair from the other side of the Fence, his heavy, rhythmic steps a comforting counterpoint to the quiet whir of the wheels. The staff, growing more confident in the stability of this unprecedented relationship, had begun to allow Leo, under strict supervision, to approach the fence itself. One frost-covered morning, a day so still the air seemed to crackle, Leo wheeled himself right up to the steel bars. His hands, still weak, trembled as he reached through. Kodiak, who had never allowed a human hand to touch him without responding with a threat, walked forward with a grace that belied his immense size. He lowered his great head, the cloud of his breath warming Leo's freezing fingers, and for the first time he allowed the touch. Leo's fingers sank into the thick, coarse fur of the bison's mane. The feeling was electric, a current of life and wildness that seemed to jolt him out of his grief-stricken stupor. Tears streamed down his face, freezing on his cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of connection, of a gratitude so profound it left him breathless. Kodiak stood perfectly still, accepting the touch, his eyes closed as if he too were experiencing a moment of profound release. In that instant, they were not a man and a beast. They were simply two beings who had found solace in the other's existence. Eleanor, watching from a distance with Marcus, felt her own eyes well up. "In all my years," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "I have never witnessed anything like this. It's not training. It's a conversation." This new level of trust opened up new possibilities. Dr. Anya Sharma, a renowned animal behaviorist from the University of Wyoming, who had heard about the case, came to the sanctuary to observe. She arrived a skeptic, armed with scientific theories and behavioral charts. But what she saw left her humbled and fascinated. Kodiak's cortisol levels, which we've monitored for years, have dropped by nearly 40% since Leo's arrival. Dr. Sharma explained to Eleanor, reviewing her initial data. His REM sleep patterns, which were previously erratic and indicative of stress, have stabilized. Physiologically, this young man is healing him. The bison's brain is being rewired by this positive social interaction, overriding years of trauma-induced conditioning. But the healing was a two-way street. Leo began to engage more with the world around him. He started conversations with the sanctuary staff, asking about the other animals. He began to sketch, his first subject being Kodiak, capturing not his ferocity, but his quiet dignity. His parents watched this reawakening with tearful joy, knowing they owed it all to the untamable beast their son had befriended. The winter deepened, blanketing the sanctuary in a thick, silent layer of snow. The world became a study in black and white, the dark shape of the bison a stark figure against the endless white. The bond between Leo and Kodiak became a single point of warmth and color in the frozen landscape. The real test of their connection, however, was yet to come. It would arrive not in the form of a gentle touch or a quiet observation, but in the heart of a raging blizzard, a storm that would threaten to destroy the sanctuary and force both man and beast to confront the true depths of their loyalty. Loyalty that would push them beyond the limits of survival and into the realm of legend. The blizzard arrived without mercy, a monstrous white fury that descended from the mountains and swallowed the sanctuary whole. It was a storm of historic proportions, the kind that old-timers spoke of with a grim reverence. The wind shrieked. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Like a banshee, piling snow into monstrous drifts that buried fences and made roads impassable, Thunder Creek Sanctuary was cut off from the world. For 2 days, Eleanor and her skeleton crew of 4 staff members, including Marcus, fought to keep the animals safe and warm, their efforts a desperate battle against the relentless power of nature. The power lines went down on the first night, plunging the sanctuary into a primal darkness, lit only by the flickering beams of flashlights and the ghostly white of the swirling snow. Leo and his parents were stranded in their small rental cabin, a mile from the main lodge. They had enough food and firewood to last a few days, but the isolation was absolute and terrifying. Leo, however, was not worried about himself. His thoughts were consumed by Kodiak. He would spend hours at the cabin window, peering through the maelstrom, trying to catch a glimpse of the bison's enclosure, his heart aching with a helplessness he hadn't felt since the first days after his accident. He knew the bison was equipped. For this weather, his thick hide and natural defense against the cold, but he couldn't shake the feeling of profound unease. On the third day of the storm, the situation turned critical. A massive pine tree, burdened by the weight of ice and snow and lashed by the gale-force winds, finally gave way. It crashed down with a sound like a cannon shot, its heavy branches smashing through a section of the roof of Leo's cabin. Snow and icy wind poured into their small living space, and a heavy beam landed across the doorway, trapping them inside. Leo's father tried to move the beam, but it was too heavy, pinned by the immense weight of the fallen tree. They were trapped. Their small fire was sputtering against the influx of wind and snow, and the temperature inside the cabin was dropping at an alarming rate. They were in very real danger of freezing to death. It was in this moment of absolute desperation that Kodiak began to act. From his enclosure, over a mile away, he had heard the crash of the falling tree. His animal senses, heightened by the storm, told him that something was wrong. The scent of fear, of human distress, carried on the wind, a signal that his human, the boy who had quieted the storm inside his own soul, was in danger. What happened next would become the cornerstone of the Thunder Creek legend. Driven by an instinct that transcended species and enclosure, Kodiak did something he had never done before. He turned his 2,000-pound frame toward the northern fence of his enclosure, the one closest to Leo's cabin. He lowered his head and charged. The reinforced steel that had held him for a decade groaned and buckled under the first impact. He backed up, his great shoulders bunched with muscle, and charged again and again. The sound of the impacts was lost in the roar of the wind, but Marcus, making a perilous check of the nearby wolf enclosure, saw the bison's terrifying, purposeful assault. "My God," he breathed into his frozen radio. "Eleanor, Kodiak is breaking out. He's heading north toward the cabins." On his fifth charge, the frozen steel snapped. A section of the fence peeled back like a tin can, and Kodiak was free. But he did not run wild. He moved with a singular, unwavering purpose, plowing through snowdrifts that were 5 feet deep, his massive body a living battering ram against the storm. He was following a scent, a feeling, a connection that no blizzard could sever. Back at the cabin, Leo and his parents were huddled together, their hope fading as the cold crept deeper into their bones. Then, through the howl of the wind, they heard a new sound. A heavy, rhythmic crunching, getting closer. Leo's father peered through a crack in the boarded-up window. His face went pale. "Leo," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "It's him. It's Kodiak." The great bison had arrived. He didn't try to approach the broken roof. Instead, he circled the cabin until he found the wall of the bedroom where he instinctively knew Leo was. And there, he simply stood, positioning his enormous, heat-radiating body against the thin wooden wall, creating a barrier against the killing wind. He had become a living furnace, a shield of flesh and fur. Inside, the temperature immediately began to stabilize. The deadly draft was cut off, and the small fire had a chance to regain its strength. Kodiak's presence was more than just a physical barrier. It was a profound statement of loyalty. He stood there for hours, a stoic guardian in the heart of the storm, his occasional low rumbles a constant reassurance that they were not alone. When the storm finally broke a day later and Eleanor's rescue team on snowmobiles finally reached the cabin, they found a scene that brought them all to a halt. The great, untouchable bison was standing vigil, his coat covered in a thick layer of ice and snow, his body a bulwark against the elements. He had saved them. He watched calmly as the crew worked to clear the fallen tree and free the family. He only moved away when he saw Leo, safe and sound, being brought out of the cabin. Their eyes met, and in that look, a lifetime of gratitude passed between them. The bison had not just broken through a fence. He had broken through every remaining barrier of doubt and fear, proving that the bond they shared was not one of convenience or curiosity, but a covenant of mutual protection, a love as fierce and powerful as the Wyoming wilderness itself. The story of Kodiak's rescue of Leo and his family became an international sensation. The tale of the untamable bison who broke through his steel enclosure not to escape, but to save the one human who had reached his broken heart, captured the imagination of millions. Thunder Creek Wildlife Sanctuary was inundated with donations, letters, and offers of support from around the world. The funds allowed Eleanor to not only repair the storm damage, but to significantly expand the sanctuary's mission, creating a new wing dedicated to researching and facilitating therapeutic bonds between traumatized animals and humans. At the heart of this new program was the incredible duo who had started it all. Kodiak was given a new, even larger enclosure, but the gate was often left open to the adjacent pasture where Leo spent his days. The young man's recovery had accelerated at a miraculous pace. The rescue had shattered the last vestiges of his paralyzing grief and replaced it with an iron will to live, to walk, to be worthy of the profound loyalty he had been shown. He no longer saw himself as a victim, but as a survivor, a partner to the most powerful and gentle soul he had ever known. A year after the blizzard, Leo took his first unassisted steps. His destination was the open gate of Kodiak's pasture. With his parents, Eleanor, and Dr. Sharma watching through tears, Leo walked slowly, painstakingly, across the grassy field. Kodiak watched him come, his massive head held high. When Leo finally reached him, exhausted but triumphant, he leaned, his forehead against the bison's warm, shaggy side. "We did it, my friend," Leo whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "We did it." Kodiak responded with his deep, rumbling hum of contentment, a sound that had become synonymous with their bond. "They stood like that for a long time, man, and Bison, two survivors who had found their strength in each other's weakness, their peace in each other's pain. The program they inspired, the Kodiak Connection, helped hundreds of people over the following years. Veterans with PTSD, children with autism, and adults grappling with grief all came to Thunder Creek to witness the living proof that healing was possible. They would watch Leo, now walking with confidence, interacting with Kodiak in a language of mutual trust that needed no words. He had become an ambassador of hope, his story a testament to the idea that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest strength. Dr. Sharma published several influential papers on their relationship, coining the term interspecies trauma resonance to describe the phenomenon where two beings from different species, both having experienced profound loss, can facilitate healing in one another through nonverbal empathetic connection. Her work with Leo and Kodiak as its primary case study revolutionized aspects of both animal and human therapy. Kodiak lived to a ripe old age, a gentle giant who had transformed from a symbol of untamable rage into a legend of unconditional love. He remained Leo's closest companion, a constant, grounding presence in a life that had been given back to him. On quiet evenings, Leo would often sit with Kodiak in the pasture as the sun set behind the mountains, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. He would tell the bison about his day, about his plans for the future, about the people their story had helped. And the great bison would listen, his quiet presence a reminder of the storm they had weathered together, both the one of snow and wind and the one that had raged within their own hearts. Their story was proof that no soul is ever truly beyond. reach, that no fence is strong enough to contain a love that is determined to protect, and that sometimes the neediest among us have the most profound gifts to offer. A young man arrived broken and in need, but in the eyes of a creature everyone else feared, he found not a monster, but a mirror to his own pain, and together, they found the one thing they both so desperately needed, a reason to live again. Years that followed were a testament to the quiet power of their story. The Kodiak connection became more than just a program. It was a philosophy, a sanctuary within the sanctuary. Leo, no longer a boy defined by what he had lost, had become a man defined by what he had found. He walked with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of the past, but his steps were sure and his gaze was clear. He had become the lead facilitator of the program, his own story serving as the most powerful testament to the healing that could occur when one soul simply refused to give up on another. He worked alongside Eleanor and Dr. Sharma, his intuitive understanding of animal trauma proving to be as insightful as any scientific methodology. He had found his calling not in a boardroom or a classroom, but in the silent, honest world of creatures who had also known profound suffering. Kodiak, for his part, had settled into the role of elder statesman with a serene dignity. The fire of his rage had been banked, replaced by the steady, warm glow of contentment. He remained the sanctuary's most awe-inspiring resident, but the fear he had once commanded had been replaced by a deep and abiding respect. He was the living, breathing heart of Thunder Creek, his bond with Leo a daily visible miracle that continued to humble and inspire everyone who witnessed it. Their friendship had evolved, deepening into a comfortable, unspoken rhythm. Leo spent part of every day in Kodiak's pasture, the space no longer an enclosure, but simply a shared home. They would often sit together for hours, Leo reading aloud or simply sketching in his notepad, while the great bison grazed peacefully nearby, his presence a vast and comforting silence. They had created a world of their own, one built on the foundations of mutual rescue and a love that had been forged in the crucible of their shared pain. But the nature of life is change, and the passage of time, which had healed so much, was now beginning to present a new and heartbreaking challenge. It began subtly, so subtly that at first, only Leo noticed. Kodiak, now approaching his late teens, an advanced age for a bison who had endured so much, started to move with a new, uncharacteristic hesitation. He would sometimes misjudge the distance to his water trough, bumping it gently with his nose before finding the edge. He occasionally stumbled on familiar terrain, catching himself with a surprised jolt. To anyone else, it would have seemed like the simple, inevitable slowing of age. But to Leo, who knew every nuance of the bison's movement, every flick of his ear, every shift in his weight, these small hesitations were like alarms ringing in the quiet of his soul. He mentioned his concerns to Eleanor, his voice tight with a fear he hadn't felt in years. "Something's wrong with his eyes, Eleanor. He's not seeing things the way he used to." Eleanor, ever practical, scheduled a full examination with a team of veterinary specialists, including a renowned ophthalmologist who was flown in from a university in Colorado. They sedated Kodiak, a process that was now remarkably calm thanks to Leo's reassuring presence throughout, and conducted a battery of tests. The diagnosis, when it came, was a blow that felt as devastating as the blizzard years ago. Kodiak was suffering from progressive bilateral cataracts, a condition exacerbated by his age and likely linked to the early life trauma and malnutrition he had endured. His vision was already severely diminished, and the specialists predicted that within a year he would be completely blind. The news fell like a stone in the sanctuary's peaceful atmosphere. A blind, 2,000-pound bison was a logistical and safety nightmare. Traditional wisdom would suggest euthanasia as the kindest, most practical option. The thought was so monstrous, so antithetical to everything Thunder Creek stood for, that no one dared to even whisper it, but it hung in the air like a specter. Leo felt the world tilt on its axis. The animal who had been his steadfast rock, his protector, his symbol of unyielding strength, was now becoming the vulnerable one. The roles were reversing, and the weight of that responsibility settled on Leo's shoulders with an intensity that was both terrifying and clarifying. He spent that evening sitting with Kodiak, long after the rest of the staff had gone home. The great bison seemed to sense his distress, nuzzling him gently in the darkness, his familiar scent a small comfort against the rising tide of Leo's fear. "You were my eyes when I couldn't see a future," Leo whispered, his voice breaking as he pressed his face into Kodiak's thick mane. "Now it's my turn. I'll be your eyes, my friend. I promise. I won't let you be afraid. I won't let you be alone." In the dark. In that moment, Leo's purpose, which had already seemed so clear, crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve. His own healing was no longer the primary mission. His life's work would now be to ensure that Kodiak's shrinking world remained a place of safety, dignity, and love. The new chapter of their life together began the very next morning. Leo abandoned all his other duties at the sanctuary, entrusting the Kodiak Connection program to a trusted colleague he had personally trained. His entire focus, every waking moment, became dedicated to preparing Kodiak for a world without sight. He began by walking the entire 50-acre enclosure with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession, removing any potential hazards, fallen branches, loose rocks, anything that could trip or injure the sightless giant. Then he started the painstakingly slow process of becoming Kodiak's guide. He devised a system of auditory cues, a language of clicks, whistles, and soft-spoken words that would signify different things. A low, steady hum meant keep walking straight. A sharp click of his tongue meant stop. 2 clicks meant turn left, and a soft whistle meant turn right. At first, Kodiak was confused and frustrated. He would often ignore the sounds, relying on his failing vision and bumping into the very obstacles Leo was trying to help him avoid. The bison's frustration would sometimes manifest as agitation, a low growl of fear rumbling in his chest. In these moments, Leo's patience was infinite. He would never raise his voice or show frustration. He would simply stop, walk to Kodiak's side, and place a calming hand on his neck, murmuring reassurances until the bison's anxiety subsided. "It's okay, buddy. It's a new language for both of us. We'll learn it together," he would say, his voice a steady anchor in Kodiak's increasingly uncertain world. The training sessions were long and emotionally draining for both of them. Leo would spend 8 to 10 hours a day walking with Kodiak, his own limp a dull ache that he pushed to the back of his mind. He taught the bison to follow the sound of his footsteps, to trust the tap of his walking stick against the ground as a signal of a clear path. He would describe the world to Kodiak as they walked. "The sun is warm on your back today, Cody. There's a herd of deer grazing to the east. I can see them from here. The wind smells like rain is coming." He was painting a picture with his words, trying to fill the encroaching darkness with the color and texture of the world Kodiak had always known. Dr. Sharma observed these sessions with scientific awe, documenting what she considered to be the most profound example of interspecies communication she had ever witnessed. "This is beyond anything we see in conditioned response training," she explained to Eleanor. "Leo isn't just training Kodiak to respond to cues. He is building a cognitive map of the enclosure in the bison's mind, using sound as a substitute. For sight, Kodiak isn't just following commands. He is learning to trust Leo's perception of reality as his own. The level of cognitive and emotional trust required for this is staggering." As Kodiak's vision faded completely, his reliance on Leo became absolute. The bison would not move from his favorite resting spot under a large cottonwood tree until he heard Leo's voice in the morning. He navigated his world entirely through the soundscape Leo created for him. Their bond, already the stuff of legend, had deepened into something even more primal, a symbiotic relationship where one being's senses served them both. A new challenge arose when the sanctuary acquired a large parcel of adjacent land and introduced a herd of younger, more boisterous bison. The scent of a potential rival, the sound of a challenging bellow from the new alpha male, sent Kodiak into a state of deep agitation. Unable to visually assess the threat, his ancient instincts screamed danger. He would pace restlessly, his head swinging back and forth, his body trembling with the stress of a perceived threat he could not see. It was Leo who calmed him. He would stand with Kodiak for hours, his hand resting on the bison's powerful shoulder, his voice a low, steady monologue of reassurance. "It's okay, big guy. That's just a young bull feeling his oats. He's a mile away, behind two fences. You are safe. I am with you. You are the king of this valley, and nothing is going to harm you." Slowly, painstakingly, Kodiak learned to filter the world through Leo's calm assurance, to trust his friend's assessment of threats over his own fear-driven instincts. He was learning to be brave in the dark, but only because Leo was willing to stand in the dark with him. This new dynamic was the ultimate expression of the promise Leo had made to himself. He was not just Kodiak's companion. He was his guardian, his guide, his window to a world that had been stolen by the shadows. The boy who had been saved by a bison's strength was now saving that same bison with the strength of his own devotion, proving that the truest form of love is not just standing by someone in their storm, but becoming the lighthouse that guides them safely to shore. The final definitive test of their new reality came with the dry, searing heat of a late summer drought. The Wyoming landscape, usually lush and green, had turned to a brittle golden tinderbox. For weeks, a red flag warning had been in effect, and the sanctuary staff, led by Eleanor and Marcus, worked tirelessly to clear brush and create fire breaks around the perimeter. Despite their best efforts, the inevitable happened. A lightning strike from a dry thunderstorm miles away ignited a spark in the bone-dry forest of the adjoining national park. Fanned by hot, gusty winds, the spark exploded into a wildfire that raged through the mountains with terrifying speed, painting the night sky with a hellish orange glow. Thunder Creek was not in the fire's direct path, but the wind shifted, pushing a thick, choking blanket of smoke down into the valley. The air became acrid and difficult to breathe, and a rain of fine gray ash began to fall, coating everything in a funereal dust. The sanctuary's hundreds of animals grew panicked. The primal fear of fire is etched into the DNA of every living creature, and the smell of smoke, combined with the eerie orange-tinted light, sent waves of terror through the enclosures. The wolves howled incessantly, the deer ran in frantic circles, and the birds fell silent. The evacuation plan, practiced quarterly, was immediately put into action. The staff needed to move the most vulnerable animals to the main concrete and steel barn complex in the center of the sanctuary, the area designated as the safest fire shelter. The biggest challenge everyone knew would be Kodiak. Moving a 2,000-pound blind bison in a state of calm was a monumental task. Moving him when he was terrified by the smell of smoke and the sounds of chaos seemed utterly impossible. When Marcus and two handlers tried to approach him, Kodiak, disoriented and panicked, reacted with defensive aggression. He couldn't see the source of the danger, so everything became a threat. He lowered his head, his powerful body trembling, and let out a roar of fear and confusion that warned them away. "We can't get near him," Marcus yelled to Eleanor over the radio, his voice strained. "He's terrified. If we push him, he's going to hurt himself or us. We might have to leave him and hope for the best." "No," a calm, firm voice said beside them. It was Leo. He had walked from his cabin through the swirling smoke, a wet bandana tied over his face. "I'll do it. Get everyone else clear." "Eleanor." looked at Leo, saw the unshakable resolve in his eyes, and made a decision. She trusted the bond between them more than she trusted any training protocol. "Clear the area," she commanded into her radio. "Leo's taking him." The scene that unfolded was one of almost surreal quiet amidst the surrounding chaos. As the staff retreated, Leo walked slowly into the smoky haze of the enclosure. He began to hum, the low, steady sound that had been the first bridge between them years ago. Through the smoke, he could see Kodiak's massive form, a study in terrified tension. "Cody," Leo called out, his voice calm and steady, betraying none of the fear that was knotting his own stomach. "It's me, buddy. I'm here. It's just a lot of smoke. The fire is far away, but we need to go for a walk. We need to go to the big barn where the air is clear." The bison's head snapped up at the sound of Leo's voice. His ears swiveled, locking onto the familiar, trusted sound. The trembling in his body lessened, just slightly. Leo approached, using the verbal cues they had practiced for months. "Okay, Cody, come to me. Just follow my voice. I'm right here." He took a step back, and then another, his voice a constant, reassuring beacon in the sensory chaos. Kodiak took a hesitant step forward, and then another. He was trusting sound over the terrifying evidence of his other senses. Leo led him step by agonizing step through the ashen landscape. When a burning ember, carried on the wind, landed sizzling on the ground nearby, Kodiak panicked, rearing back. But Leo didn't run. He stood his ground, speaking calmly, his voice a shield against the fear. "Easy, big guy. Just a spark. I'm still here. We're okay. Just a little further." He placed his hand on Kodiak's massive shoulder, the physical contact, grounding the terrified animal. For nearly 30 minutes, the slow, tense procession continued. It was a dance of absolute trust. A young man and a blind bison walking through a smoky apocalypse, bound together by a connection that defied logic. When they finally reached the massive, open doors of the fireproof barn, Kodiak hesitated. The unfamiliar threshold, a new source of fear. Leo didn't pull or push. He simply walked inside, his voice calling back softly. "It's safe in here, Cody. The air is good. Come on in, I'll stay with you." After a long, tense moment, the great bison lowered his head and followed his friend into the safety of the barn. As the heavy steel doors rolled shut behind them, sealing out the smoke and the chaos, Kodiak collapsed onto the thick straw bedding, exhausted but calm. Leo knelt beside him, stroking his great head, his own body, trembling with the adrenaline of what they had just accomplished. They had walked through the fire together. The wildfire was contained by heroic firefighting crews over the next 2 days, and the sanctuary was spared any direct damage. But the story of Leo and Kodiak's journey through the smoke became the most powerful legend of all. It was the ultimate validation of their bond. The young man, once trapped in a wheelchair and rescued by the bison's strength, had repaid the debt in full, using his own courage and their shared language of trust to lead his blind, powerful friend out of the heart of fear. In the years that followed, as Kodiak lived out his long and peaceful life in the safety of the sanctuary, his world was not one of darkness. It was a world illuminated by the voice and touch of his human companion. Leo would sit with him for hours, describing the changing colors of the seasons, the flight of an eagle overhead, the antics of the new foals in the next pasture. He was Kodiak's eyes, his guide, his unwavering friend. Their story completed its perfect, poignant circle. It was a testament to the idea that rescue is never a one-time event, but an ongoing promise. It was proof that the deepest purpose can be found not in what we achieve for ourselves, but in what we are willing to become for another. The boy who was saved found his strength. The bison who saved him found his peace. And in their shared twilight, they taught the world that true vision is not about what you see with your eyes, but what you understand with your heart. The sanctuary existed in a state of grace for 5 peaceful years after the fire. The seasons turned, painting the valley in their familiar hues, and the rhythm of life at Thunder Creek was dictated by the quiet, profound bond between the man and the bison. Leo, now in his late 20s, had become the soul of the place, his presence as calming and essential as the stream that gave the sanctuary its name. The Kodiak connection was a resounding success, a model for therapeutic programs worldwide, but its heart remained the daily, unspoken communion between its 2 original members. Kodiak, aging but majestic, lived his sightless life with a serenity that baffled veterinary science. His world was not one of darkness, but a rich tapestry of sounds, smells, and textures, all interpreted for him through the unwavering filter of Leo's presence. He knew the crunch of Leo's boots on gravel, the specific pitch of his whistle signaling a clear path, the familiar scent that meant safety, home, and love. The story, it seemed, had reached its perfect, harmonious conclusion. A tale of mutual rescue, of healing, of a love so profound it had rewritten the rules of nature. But the world outside the sanctuary's protected borders had not forgotten, and a past far darker than anyone knew was about to stretch its long shadow into their peaceful valley. The harbinger arrived on a crisp autumn morning. It wasn't a storm cloud or the scent of fire, but a sleek, black vehicle that moved with an unnatural quiet down the long dirt road leading to the sanctuary. It was a government vehicle, devoid of markings, but radiating an aura of sterile authority that felt alien and hostile in this place of natural healing. 2 individuals emerged, a man and a woman, dressed in severe dark suits that seemed to absorb the sunlight. They were not here to see the animals or to offer a donation. They carried briefcases and the cold, detached expressions of people who dealt not in miracles, but in assets. They introduced themselves to Eleanor as agents from the Department of the Interior, a little-known branch called the Division of Biological Assets. The name itself sent a chill down her spine. In her small rustic office, surrounded by photos of rescued animals and the lingering scent of hay and cedar, the agents laid out their purpose with chilling efficiency. The man, who introduced himself as Deputy Director Erickson, opened his briefcase and produced a file nearly 4 inches thick. The front was stamped with stark red letters, classified, and on the label, below a string of alphanumeric codes, was a single, typed name, Kodiak. "We're here about Asset KBO1, Erickson began, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Also, known as Kodiak, we have reason to believe you have been in possession of this asset for approximately 15 years. Eleanor stared at him, bewildered. Possession? Asset? Kodiak is a resident of this sanctuary. He was the lone survivor of a herd wiped out by disease. Erickson offered a thin, dismissive smile. That is the accepted narrative. A convenient fiction that served its purpose at the time. The truth, Miss Vance, is considerably more complex." He slid the file across the desk. Leo, who had been called into the meeting at Eleanor's request, wheeled himself closer, his eyes fixed on the ominous red letters. Erickson explained the history in cold, clipped sentences that stripped the story of all its heart. Kodiak was not a random bison. He was the last known pure-blooded descendant of the original Yellowstone herd, the result of a decades-long, top-secret government breeding initiative, Project Progenitor, aimed at preserving a perfect, untainted bison genome. His herd was not lost to disease. When the project was abruptly defunded during a shift in political administrations, the herd was deemed a liability. The official order was to decommission the entire population. It was a sanitized word for a systematic slaughter. Kodiak, then just a small, terrified calf, had managed to escape during the chaos of the operation, disappearing into the wilderness. He was officially listed as asset lost, presumed terminated. Through a recent cross-reference of genetic databases, a A sample submitted for one of your colleagues' research papers was flagged. The female agent added, her tone equally flat. Dr. Sharma's work on interspecies bonding, while fascinating from a behavioral standpoint, inadvertently revealed the location of our lost asset. We are here to reclaim him. Leo felt the air leave his lungs. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. The story of Kodiak's trauma, which he thought he knew so intimately, was a lie. The truth was infinitely more horrific. His family hadn't just died. They had been executed. His fear of humans wasn't just from a lonely survival. It was the cellular memory of a massacre. His rage, the explosive violence of his early years at the sanctuary, was not madness. It was the righteous fury of a being who had witnessed the unpardonable, and his trust in Leo, his willingness to let one human, one member of the species that had destroyed his entire world, touch him, guide him, heal him. It was elevated from a miracle into an act of grace so profound it was almost divine. Reclaim him? Leo's voice was a ragged whisper. What are you talking about? This is his home. He's an old blind animal who has been through hell. You can't possibly. With all due respect, son, Erickson cut in, his eyes like chips of flint. Your emotional attachment is irrelevant. Asset KBO1 is a priceless genetic repository. Project Progenitor is being restarted with new funding. He is not a pet. He is a key component of a multi-million-dollar federal program. We have a court order, signed by a federal judge, authorizing his immediate seizure. He slid another document across the desk. The cold legal language was irrefutable. They owned Kodiak. They were coming to take him. The world that Leo and Kodiak had built together, a world of trust, healing, and quiet love, was about to be shattered by the people who had first broken it. The fight for Kodiak's body was over. The fight for his soul was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of frantic legal battles and quiet, heartbreaking conversations. Eleanor's lawyers filed emergency injunctions, arguing that moving a blind, geriatric animal with a complex history of trauma would be an act of cruelty tantamount to torture. They argued that Kodiak was not an asset, but a sentient being, with established rights under sanctuary care. The government's lawyers countered with the cold, hard fact of ownership. They had the receipts, the genetic markers, the full weight of federal authority on their side. The story leaked to the press, and a firestorm of public debate erupted. The narrative was perfect for the 24-hour news cycle. The faceless, heartless government versus the gentle blind Bison and the devoted man who had saved him. The public was overwhelmingly on the sanctuary's side. #SaveKodiak trended worldwide. But public opinion held little sway over the machinations of federal bureaucracy. The injunctions were systematically overturned. The appeals were denied. Erickson made it clear that they would not be deterred. They were coming for their property. Leo spent every possible moment with Kodiak. The weight of the Bison's true history settled between them, changing the very nature of their silence. Leo now understood the depths of the darkness the animal had navigated. He would look at the gentle giant and imagine him as a terrified calf, alone in a world red with the blood of his family. He would run his hands through the thick fur and wonder how, after all that, Kodiak could ever have found it in him to trust another human being. He felt an anger so pure and white-hot it scared him. It was an anger on Kodiak's behalf, a protective fury that dwarfed any of the Bison's own past rages. He sat with Kodiak one evening as the sun set, the sky a beautiful bruised purple. He finally told him, "I know now, Cody," he said, his voice thick. "I know what they did to you, to your family. I am so sorry. They see you as a thing they own, but I see you. And I swear to you, I will not let them take you. I will not let them put you back in a cage. They will have to go through me." Kodiak, blind as he was, seemed to understand the shift in Leo's tone. He pressed his massive head against Leo's chest, letting out a low, resonant rumble that was not one of contentment, but of shared strength, of solidarity. He had faced the monsters once and survived. Now his boy would face them for him. The final appeal was denied on a Thursday. On Friday morning, the black vehicles returned, this time accompanied by a massive, state-of-the-art animal transport truck and a team of handlers in tactical gear. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to execute the court order. Erickson stepped out of his vehicle, his face an impassive mask. "Ms. Vance, Mr. Leo," he said, addressing them formally. "The legal process is concluded. We are here to take possession of the asset." News crews, tipped off by the sanctuary's PR team, were gathered at the main gate, their cameras broadcasting the scene live to a global audience. The agents ignored them. They unslung tranquilizer rifles from their shoulders. The plan was to dart Kodiak and winch his unconscious body into the climate-controlled container. "You can't do that," Leo stated, his voice ringing with an authority no one had ever heard from him before. He stepped forward, planting himself in their path. "He's blind. He's agitated. An animal of his size and age, under this much stress. The tranquilizer could stop his heart. You will kill him." "That is a risk we are prepared to take," Erickson said coldly. "Our veterinarian is on site. Now step aside." It was in that moment that Leo saw the only path, a desperate, terrifying gamble that rested entirely on the 15 years of love and trust that had been built in this valley. "No," Leo said. "You want him? You won't get him that way. But I will walk him to that truck for you." Erickson stared at him, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features. "That's absurd. The animal is clearly in distress." "He is," Leo agreed. "He's terrified. He can smell you. He knows you're the same as the ones who came for his family. He will fight you until his last breath, but he won't fight me. Let me go to him. Let me try to lead him. If I can't, if he is beyond my reach, then you can do whatever you feel you must. But you give me this chance. You let the world see what you are really taking." Erickson glanced at the news cameras, at the live feed being broadcast to millions. He saw the public relations disaster unfolding. A dead bison on national television was not an acceptable outcome. Reluctantly, he gave a curt nod. "You have 10 minutes. After that, we proceed as planned." Leo turned away from the cold-faced agents and toward the pasture where Kodiak was pacing, roaring his fear into the morning air. The sound was a visceral echo of the traumatized bull Leo had first met, a sound he had not heard in over a decade. He took a deep breath, pushing down his own terror, and walked toward the gate, toward the blind, roaring giant. The world watched, holding its breath, as the young man prepared to step into the enclosure to face the source of all his healing, now consumed by the source of all its pain. The question hung heavy and silent in the Wyoming air. Was their bond strong enough to lead a blind king out of the ghosts of his own history, or would they both be consumed by it? The world held its breath. The live newsfeed split its screen, one side showing the cold, determined faces of the federal agents and their formidable equipment, the other side showing a lone figure walking into a field of smoke and terror. Leo stepped through the gate, the metallic click of the latch sounding like a gunshot in the tense silence. The air inside the enclosure was thick with the scent of Kodiak's fear, a primal musky odor that was sharp and suffocating. The great bison, a 2,000-pound mountain of traumatized memory, was circling frantically, his sightless head swinging low to the ground. He roared, a sound torn from the deepest recesses of his soul, a sound of agony and defiance that was a direct echo of the day his world had ended. He couldn't see the men in their dark suits, but he knew them. He knew their scent, their cold intention. They were the ghosts of his past, come to finish the job. Leo did not call out his name. He knew that any familiar command would be lost in the hurricane of Kodiak's terror. Instead, he began to hum. It was the same low, resonant frequency he had used when Kodiak was first agitated by the younger bulls, a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the heart, a vibration of pure, unwavering calm. He stood just inside the gate, making himself a statue of peace amidst the chaos, and he hummed the melody of their friendship into the smoky air. For a full minute, the bison continued his frantic pacing, trapped in the prison of his own memory. The narrator in Leo's mind, the one that had guided him through his own darkness, spoke with crystal clarity. He doesn't hear you, he only hears them. You have to go deeper. Leo closed his eyes and focused his entire being on the bison. He wasn't just humming a tune. He was projecting a feeling. He thought of the first time Kodiak had allowed his touch, the feeling of that coarse fur under his trembling fingers. He thought of the blizzard, of the bison's immense warmth shielding him from the killing cold. He thought of the thousands of hours they had spent in companionable silence, of the shared sunrises and the quiet trust that had rebuilt both their souls. He poured all of it, the gratitude, the love, the unshakable loyalty, into that simple vibrating sound. Slowly, miraculously, the hurricane began to subside. Kodiak's frantic circles began to widen, his roars lessening into deep, shuddering breaths. He stopped, his massive head turned in the direction of the hum, his body still trembling, but his ears now twitching with recognition. The sound was a lifeline, a single familiar note in an orchestra of terror. It was the sound of safety. It was the sound of Leo. "That's it, Cody," Leo whispered, his voice barely audible, yet it cut through the tension like a warm knife. "It's just me. I'm here. The ghosts aren't real. I am." He took a single deliberate step forward. Kodiak flinched, his muscles coiling, the traumatic memories fighting for control. Erickson, watching from outside the fence, gestured to his team, his hand hovering near his tranquilizer rifle. He was losing patience. Leo saw the movement out of the corner of his eye and knew he was out of time. He did the only thing he could think of. He began to tell their story. "Do you remember the first day I saw you, big guy?" he said, his voice growing stronger, more conversational. "You were standing on that ridge, looking like the loneliest king in the world. I was so broken, Cody. I thought my life was over, but I saw you and I knew I wasn't alone." Kodiak's head tilted. The words, the tone, the cadence, they were the fabric of his new life, the narrative that had overwritten his pain. Leo took another step. "And the rainstorm? When my chair got stuck in the mud. You stood there, Cody. You stood in that freezing wind, and you kept me safe. No one had ever protected me like that, not since my brother. You were my shield." With every sentence, with every shared memory Leo invoked, another layer of the bison's terror peeled away. The ghosts of the cold-faced men began to recede, replaced by the warm, vivid images of his life with Leo, the sound of the humming, the texture of the boy's hand, the quiet peace of their shared pasture. This was his reality now, not the slaughter, not the fear. Leo. Finally, Leo stood just a few feet from the still trembling giant. "I'm going to take you for a walk now, Cody. To a place you won't like, to a metal box. But I need you to. Trust me, I need you to walk with me. Because I will not let them hurt you. I will not leave you. I promise." He held out his hand. Kodiak, the blind king, took one hesitant, shuddering step forward and pressed his wet nose into Leo's palm. It was an act of surrender, not to the men in suits, but to the boy he loved. A collective gasp went through the crowd of onlookers. On the live broadcast, the network commentators fell silent, letting the power of the image speak for itself. Erickson lowered his hand from his rifle, his face an unreadable mask of astonishment. The walk began. It was the longest 100 yards of Leo's life. With one hand on Kodiak's massive shoulder, and his voice a constant stream of reassurance, he guided the bison across the field. The world shrank to just the two of them. The news helicopters buzzing overhead, the clicks of the cameras, the tense whispers of the federal agents, it all faded into a distant hum. There was only the feel of Kodiak's warm hide, the soft crunch of their steps on the dry grass, and Leo's voice weaving a tapestry of safety around them. "That's it. Just one more step. You're doing so good, Cody. You're the bravest soul I've ever known." They reached the transport truck. The massive steel ramp loomed before them like the entrance to a tomb. The metallic smell was sharp, institutional, and Kodiak balked, his old terror surging. He pulled back, his hooves digging into the earth. This was a bridge too far. The memory of being herded, of confinement, of the scent of death associated with metal and machinery was too deeply ingrained. "I know, buddy, I know," Leo soothed, not trying to pull him. "It's scary, I get it." He looked at the dark, cavernous maw of the trailer, and then he looked at his friend, his blind, terrified, loyal friend. And he knew what he had to do. He had promised he would not leave him. He turned to the bison, placed both his hands on the animal's broad face, and said, "Wait for me. I'll be right back." Then, to the utter shock of everyone watching, Leo turned and walked up the ramp himself. He disappeared into the darkness of the trailer without a moment's hesitation. The camera zoomed in on the empty ramp, the tension skyrocketing. A full 10 seconds passed. Then, from within the darkness of the truck, Leo's voice called out, calm and clear, "It's okay in here, Cody. It's just a big, empty room. But it's missing something. It's missing you. I'm waiting for you, my friend." Outside, Kodiak was in turmoil. His protector was gone, swallowed by the metal monster, but his voice was in there. His safety, his anchor, was in there. He lifted his head, let out one last mournful cry, a sound of fear being conquered by love, and he took a step onto the ramp. Then another. Step by heavy, deliberate step, the blind bison walked up the steel ramp and disappeared into the darkness to join his friend. The image was seared into the consciousness of the millions watching. The man had been willing to be caged to prove his friend was not just an asset. He had walked into the darkness first. It was a checkmate that no court order could overcome. Deputy Director Erickson stood frozen for a long moment, the sounds of his own team's stunned silence ringing in his ears. He looked at the news cameras, at the weeping faces in the crowd, at the closed transport truck that now held not just a bison, but an unbreakable bond. His stony facade finally cracked. He was a man who understood leverage, optics, and unwinnable fights. He had just been handed a masterclass in all three. He slowly raised his radio to his mouth. "All teams," he said, his voice clipped but carrying a new note of finality. "Stand down, pack it up, we're leaving." A cheer erupted from the crowd, a wave of cathartic relief that washed over the valley. Inside the truck, Leo, who had been stroking Kodiak's head in the darkness, heard the cheer. He led his friend carefully back down the ramp and into the sunlight. They were met with a sea of cameras and tearful faces. Eleanor was the first to reach them, throwing her arms around Leo in a fierce hug. Marcus slapped him on the back, his gruff face split by a wide, emotional grin. The government vehicles turned and drove away, their black paint seeming to slink away in defeat. The battle was over. Kodiak was home. He was safe. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The footage of Leo walking into the trailer became the defining image of the year, a symbol of love and defiance against cold bureaucracy. Facing a public relations nightmare and immense political pressure, the Department of the Interior not only dropped its claim on Kodiak but went a step further. In a press conference a month later, Deputy Director Erickson, his face now carefully arranged into a mask of benevolent wisdom, announced the creation of a new federal designation, Kodiak was declared a national living treasure, and Thunder Creek Sanctuary was designated a National Heritage Site for interspecies study, to be protected in perpetuity with federal support. The government, in a brilliant act of political jiu-jitsu, had turned its defeat into a victory, claiming credit for recognizing the very bond they had tried to shatter. For Leo and Kodiak, the fanfare meant little. Their lives returned to the quiet rhythm that had defined them. But something had fundamentally shifted. The final ghost had been exorcised. The last shadow of Kodiak's past had been faced down, and conquered not by rage, but by a trust so absolute it had bent the will of a government. Their bond was no longer just a private miracle. It was a protected, celebrated fact. The final years of Kodiak's life were his most peaceful. His world may have been physically dark, but his spirit was luminous. He had Leo. He knew no fear. He was an old king who had finally found his lasting peace, a gentle giant who spent his days dozing in the sun, listening to the familiar sounds of the sanctuary and the constant, reassuring murmur of Leo's voice. Leo, in turn, had found a peace that he never thought possible. The gaping wound of his brother's death had healed into a scar that he carried with acceptance, not agony. His work, his purpose was clear and all-consuming. He had become a world-renowned voice for a new kind of compassionate conservation, one that saw animals not as assets or statistics, but as individuals with complex emotional lives. The end came on a gentle summer evening, almost 25 years after Kodiak had first arrived at the sanctuary as a traumatized calf. He was ancient, his great body finally beginning to fail him. He had laid down in his favorite pasture, under the shade of the old cottonwood tree, and had not gotten up. His breathing was shallow, his immense energy finally spent. Leo knew the time had come. He canceled all appointments, closed the sanctuary to visitors, and went to be with his friend. He lay down in the grass beside the great Bison, resting, his head on Kodiak's massive, still shoulder, just as he had seen him do with the rescued puppy so many years ago. He did not cry. His heart was filled with a grief so vast it had no room for tears, only a profound, quiet gratitude. For hours he stayed there, his voice a soft, continuous whisper against the Bison's ear. He told their story one last time, from the beginning to the end. He described the ridge where he first saw him, the icy rain of the storm, the warmth of his touch. He described the blizzard, the fire, the long walk across the ashen field. He described the terror in the face of the government agents, and the absolute trust that had conquered it. "You healed me, Cody," he whispered as the stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky. "You took all my broken pieces, and you showed me how to be whole. You taught me how to be brave. You gave me a life, my friend, a beautiful life." As dawn approached, casting a soft pearlescent light over the valley, Kodiak's labored breathing slowed, and then, as peacefully as a sigh, it stopped. He was gone. Leo remained with him, his hand resting on the still warm fur, until the sun had fully risen, bathing his friend's magnificent form in golden light. In the weeks that followed, tributes poured in from around the world. But Leo found his comfort, not in the words of others, but in the enduring legacy of their love. He had Kodiak buried in his favorite pasture, under the cottonwood tree, marked only by a single large, uncarved stone. The sanctuary thrived, a testament to the principles Kodiak had taught them. And Leo continued his work, his heart forever, shaped by the blind, broken Bison who had seen him, truly seen him, when no one else could. Their story had become a modern fable, a testament that love is not about possession, but protection. Not about what we can see, but what we can feel. It was the story of how a needy young man who couldn't walk and an untouchable Bison who couldn't see guided each other out of the darkness, and in doing so, taught the world an eternal truth, that the most powerful force in the universe is not the will to dominate, but but the courage to love unconditionally and forever. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.